All right. Good afternoon. The meeting of the Faculty Senate will come to order. Just as a note for everyone today, we're having some technical issues with the feed to tech in Montgomery, and so we're going to hear audio, but we will probably not have video for tech. So for those connecting from a distance, there's a slight delay, so please begin your reporting with Potomac State or WVU Tech votes, and then the number, so that we don't lose any important information. Potomac State, how many are present?
Potomac State has 3 senators, Wilcox, Goff, and Merrifield.
Thank you. West Virginia Tech and Montgomery, how many are present?
We have 3 senators present in Montgomery, Senators Rakes, Davari, and Barco.
Thank you. And we do have a quorum for this afternoon. The minutes of the previous meeting were distributed as an annex to your agenda. Is there any corrections, or are there any corrections from the January meeting? All right, hearing none, the minutes are approved as written. We will have the provost report today. John Campbell, the vice provost, will be giving remarks for Provost McConnell.
Thank you, Lena. And Joyce sends her regards. Right now, she's in a NCAA infractions committee meeting. She was part of the new infractions committee, and she said she'd be here if she could be here. And since she's not here, I get the call of duty. So thanks, everyone, for coming out this afternoon. And I think the weather keeps changing quite frequently. It's hard to believe it was 60-some degrees one day and 30-something degrees the other. Last week, we celebrated our 150th anniversary. On February 7th, 1867, Governor Borman signed a bill that created the Agricultural College of West Virginia that later became West Virginia University a year later. Last week, we held celebrations at the new Davis College building, as well as Health Sciences and the Mountain Layer. And the attendance to those was absolutely amazing. They were packed houses, and we were quite happy with the attendance from our faculty, staff, and students. Throughout this year, we'll be having additional celebrations and really about our history as well as our ongoing accomplishments. And so hopefully during the next year, you'll please join us. Also, last Friday, we announced a major gift from Robert and Laura Reynolds to the College of Business and Economics. This $10 million gift will be going towards a new business and economics building that will be located along the river where the current Stansbury Hall is located. There's a lot of work and a lot of planning that still remains for that facility. Don't expect the construction crews to show up this spring. There's additional fundraising to go, as well as planning. We have a lot of departments still located in Stansbury, so there's kind of a cascade of projects that will occur over the next few years to make that possible. Bob Reynolds credits his faculty members here in finance for nurturing his will to succeed. For those of you, Bob was a CEO of Great West Life Co., as well as Putnam Investments. And so we celebrated that last Friday as well as Saturday. Many of you were aware that we made an announcement a few weeks ago about the closing of Arnold Hall and relocating, or opening up, I should say, housing at University Place. This was really left to be the choice of the students, whether they wanted to go to the new housing or whether they wanted to pick something else that was more along their budget. The South Tower of University Place is named Seneca Hall. And as of last Friday, we had about 290 students sign up for the new housing of the 450 spots. And in terms of the North Tower, which is more apartment-style complexes, we're currently 467 of the 472 spots are signed up. So that's going extremely well. I've had already a number of people talk to me about the budget in the West Virginia legislative session. The legislative session began last week. Wednesday, the governor gave the State of the State address, and he outlined really pretty well the kind of issues that the state is looking at, including declining coal revenues, job losses, issues as it relates to infrastructure, transportation, public education. In numerical terms, we're facing a $500 million deficit at the state. And that's a very large number. To put it in a perspective, the total state budget's between $4 and $4.5 billion. And so we're looking at $500 million as the deficit. The governor proposed a balanced budget in which consisted about $26 million in cuts. WVU was one of those proposed cuts of about $5.9 million, as well as increased fees and other revenue items to make up the difference. The talk was quite well done, but this is just the beginning of the process. So over the next 60 days or so, as I've told others, strap in. This is going to be a ride. It's going to be a roller coaster. I don't think we ought to consider that this is a place where it's going to end up. There's going to be lots of ups and downs. So, as we learn more, we'll keep this group informed. And if you have questions or suggestions, by all means, let us know. On Monday, January 30th, we had a open forum relating to the White House travel ban that was issued. This occurred, if you recall, the White House travel ban was issued on a Friday. And by Monday, we had this forum in which we brought an immigration lawyer down from Pittsburgh, as well as our local experts to answer questions. We had about 300 people or so, and we have kind of ongoing communications happening with our Office of Global Affairs between students and interested faculty. We are aware that we had one faculty member that was caught outside of the U.S. and unable to get in for a period of time, but that faculty member is back and is teaching courses. But you'll hear a little bit more of an update from William Brustein, who will be talking a little later on today. In terms of, get to read other people's notes. Have some great news going on campus. So first of all, Joyce McConnell hosted a legislators forum on and around education on January 26th and 27th to really kind of address the issues related to education. We had 24 legislators, including the committee chairs, attend that. It was an extremely valuable session, and the comments and feedback that we're getting back is, let's do this again. Let's have WVU lead the way in terms of addressing these issues. The National Jurist ranks the WVU Law School number 2 in the country in terms of the greatest community impact. And so this is one of the leading publications in the legal field. WVU's law clinics serve over 500 clients or client groups over the past year and has extended over 40,000 hours, which is about 123 hours a student involved in this. The article also cited WVU's flood relief efforts and immigration law clinic as part of that success. In terms of other good news, engineering continues to work on their retention. In the fall of 2016, they were able to reduce their DFW rates among their students in half over 4 years. So they were up about 20% of the students being on probation. or being in academic trouble. And then this fall, they've reduced that to just a little under 10%. And so a lot of congratulations to that. And finally, just a little update on the CIO search, which is fond to my heart, because as soon as I can get that person filled, the sooner I could stop holding 2 jobs. We have about 110 applicants for that position right now. The committee is getting together on March 1st to complete the review of that pile of applicants. And then from there, they'll do some phone interviews. And from there, probably about the end of March, we'll start bringing candidates to campus. So with that, I'll ask whether you have any questions or comments. How about from Tech or Potomac State?
We have no questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Up next, we have an update on WVU Tech's transition to the Beckley campus from Nigel Clark.
Thanks, Lena. Okay, Madam Chair and mountaineers and bears and catamounts and so on. I was asked by the chair to give you a presentation on what was happening down at Tech and with the move to Beckley. And to start off, I'm just thought I would put the Gawley Bridge mural up there with this, and you can see the coal train heading to the crossing. So it's quite apocryphal for the southern part of the state. Many people have never visited Tech. Many people are unaware of Tech's role in the WVU system. So I thought I would blend in some, really a brief report about who we are and what we are, because that will help you see what we have to move. And you can see we have a fairly rich history. We're about 1 human generation younger than this campus. And important things for Tech were really the absorption by West Virginia University in 2 stages, the carving off of the 2-year program, first as Bridgemont, which became Bridge Valley when the community colleges were separated. And following the declining industry and population in the Kanawha Valley, particularly the Upper Kanawha, there was a shrink in student population and a shrinking of employment for students in the chemical industry. And this led in the end to a revitalization report, suggested amelioration of Tech. There wasn't necessarily all the funding available. And along came 2012 when Mountain State lost accreditation. Eventually closed. The campus was occupied by University of Charleston for a short period and then was purchased by WVU. And there was legislative action needed last year to ensure that Tech could actually move to Beckley. Our academic programs are fairly broad, gathered under 2 colleges. We teach forensic investigation, criminal justice, and then your usual arts sciences, social sciences. We have an ABET accredited engineering program, which is standalone from Statler, which has been highly rated by US News. And a WVU nursing program is on Tech campus, and that shares common accreditation with the Tech program here. So we're moving about 85 faculty. And we also have Tech Adventures, which is similar to Adventure West Virginia, and we have a Student Success Center. We have athletics. At one point in time, Tech had football. Really, probably men's and women's soccer are now 2 of the key sports, along with basketball. do quite well in the NAIA, and I will say that the soccer team has attracted international students who've been quite exceptional academically as well. So the Beckley campus is the old Mountain State campus, consists of a number of buildings going from Carter Hall, which is a fine old stone building that could take a direct nuclear hit and survive, to some new buildings as new as a residence hall that had seen only about one semester of use. And so some of these buildings were immediately usable. Some of these buildings required some internal construction, particularly since Mountain State didn't actually carry the engineering programs that Tech has. And I've included there the first day where WVU Beckley appeared on the city's signs around town, and the Board of Governors meeting when they were first looking at the sign there for Beckley campus. Now, a little bit about the process of internal communication to the constituencies at Tech. It was decided that we would we would start a freshman program at Tech last fall, and so there are currently freshman students there, and that everything would move by the fall of 2017. So the Higher Learning Commission actually required a teach-out plan for this transition, and this was a good thing for the students. They were all informed through various media, because there's obviously no single medium anymore for communication with the student body, about whether they could graduate in Montgomery or whether they would move to Beckley. They were advised to consult directly with their faculty advisors. And what was a good thing was that the GEF came in at just the right time, and some students were actually able to graduate with a few credit hours less than they would have required for the GEC and complete at Montgomery. So the faculty and staff have learned about the developments through regular campus meetings. They were all assured of employment in Beckley. I will say that many faculty lived in Charleston, have plans either to continue living in Charleston and commuting the way they did to Montgomery, or living in Beckley. And I believe that we will lose relatively few faculty other than to natural retirement and so on. Some of the staff are more place-bound, and there really is a division between those who will go to Beckley and those who will remain in the Montgomery-Smithers area. But faculty, staff, and students alike all supported the move at the time of the legislative action. And of course, new hires were told of the Montgomery to Beckley transition and that they would be in Beckley. And there has been an early voluntary questionnaire, and now we are going to have a firmer questionnaire on will you move or not as we approach the move date. So the transitional year right now, we have freshman classes in both Beckley and Montgomery, but all student athletes remained in Montgomery because we hadn't set up the athletic infrastructure in Beckley. All engineering was in Montgomery because some of the larger apparatus could not be duplicated, could not be moved, although I'll say we had a few students who were taking basic courses in Beckley who could move into engineering. We are substantially using 3 of the buildings. We have a fairly small count of students, but the library and the Bear's Den, which is the dining area, and the residence halls are all active out there. And faculty are teaching on both campuses so that they remain in contact with one another. Some are teaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday in Beckley, and Tuesday, Thursday in Montgomery. And we're preparing the campus for fall 2017 for the full move. And obviously, we are recruiting for Beckley. And you will see that the 2 campuses are 42 miles apart. about a 50-minute drive. The difference is not that great if you're commuting from Charleston. Perhaps one of the most noteworthy things was town and gown relations. We were walking on the campus very early, a few of us, and a car pulled up on the street and the window went down and it said, "Are you folks from WVU?" And we said, "Oh yeah, we are." And they said, "Welcome, welcome, welcome." And it's been that way the whole time. The Rotary meetings have sought WVU speakers. Javier Reyes has been there speaking, Mike McCauley from Public Health, and Carolyn and I have spoken there. We have agreements in place for a lot of sports facilities, athletic facilities, and a good relationship with the Summit Bechtel Reserve, as does WVU Morgantown. And then a lot of high school interactions developing, including visits of whole high school groups to Tech. And a photograph of the Eplings there, who own the Miners baseball team and field. So how are we going to complete this transition? Well, all classes will be in Beckley in the fall of 2017, and in fact, although it's nominal because they're online, we will offer summer classes out of Beckley. There's an engineering laboratory building that is needed for some of the larger apparatus, and that will be ready towards the end of the summer, and there's groundbreaking there. University Hall in the background of that photograph is the new residence hall. We are renovating the physical sciences and classroom buildings. The physical sciences laboratories are currently sharing with biology and will move into the new building over the summer. There's a lot of classroom technology updates. In fact, really IT needed to be reinvented on campus. That was a fairly substantial effort. And most faculty will move in May after graduation, and the remainder in July or August if their offices aren't in fact ready for the May move. And then throughout the summer we're going to be moving equipment and engineering laboratories and furniture, and of course icons like the Stone Bear will have to travel with us to Beckley. Now, while all this is going on, there are these regular duties that would normally be happening, like dealing with digital measures, which we've tried to delay a little, but it is happening. Developmental to co-requisite change, so Potomac State will also be familiar with this. We delivered developmental courses to students who were not yet equipped to take some of the entry-level 3-digit courses, and those are being changed to co-requisites at this moment in time. Course harmonization with this campus and with Potomac State. Catalog revision. Our catalogs for us will be integrated with the WVU catalog. We are digitizing registrars' records that should have been digitized quite a long time ago. We're about to enter degree works. We're looking at some culinary courses and adventure recreation management courses. In fact, the adventure recreation management are on the books for our students to take. And I'd mentioned IT, and of course we've got the new Higher Learning Commission faculty qualifications, which probably fractionally impacts us a little more than it does the Morgantown campus, where most faculty are research-oriented. So now the future, and here's a disclaimer. This is not necessarily a consensus thing. These are some of my opinions on what we have to do when we make it to Beckley. There is no question that we need to increase the student head count. We suffer from a high section count, some of them with a small student number in the sections. And we want to recruit both in-state and out-of-state. We have to start employing analytic tools more for admissions and retention and understand pathways. Everyone is really going along this track. This is really the beginning of efficient, personalized education. But we're very affordable, and we want to maintain that affordability. And we've had high academic standards. And perhaps Tech prides itself most on first-generation students who may be ill-equipped for higher education, but certainly have the aptitude for higher education and turning out a very fine product. We also pride ourselves on our faculty-student interaction because we have a good ratio and we don't want to lose that. But most importantly, we really realize that the economic difficulties of this state are exacerbated in southern West Virginia. I will say Morgantown and Mon County are an enclave. And we have to be involved with economic development and consider some academic programs that will actually support that growth. And thinking of things like tourism and wood products and some of the stuff that's still sustainable within the state. And engage with local communities and student service learning, and really promote the hub of 77, 64, and 19, and this is a communication thing. This is much like the intersection of interstates at Morgantown. It perhaps is one of the most important things that will promote our future success. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Nigel, what's the current student population?
About 1,300.
And what are your goals
If you perform an analysis, so to be just a tiny bit long-winded, and you increase the student population, some of the classes we have, like English and math, increase in proportion. So to fill the sections reasonably, we're really looking at something like 2,500. So we're really looking at a doubling of that population to be viable.
What's the status of the new engineering building in terms of where is that in terms of construction?
So the new engineering building is actually a pretty fast construction building. It's actually a metal on metal frame, and they have broken ground, are doing the foundations, and have every expectation of having it done by midsummer.
Parviz Famuri, Statler College. So could you please explain to me the names of so right now it's WVU Beckley, but then what's going to happen to WVU IT? And in fall, when a student goes to Beckley, what do they say? I'm going to WVU or I'm going to WVU IT. So could you explain those two terminology for me? Thank you.
I've had the pleasure of trying to explain this to some of our new faculty. It isn't easy. There is an issue that the tech campus, as we know it right now in Montgomery, is actually the home to WVU nursing. And at present, the sports management program there, for example, is a WVU program. And in Beckley, WVU Extension is there. And there's really a launch lab and innovation center there as well. So there are actually some things on the campus that are not just tech. And I will add that the address that we use in Beckley arose because a social work master's program was taught at that particular building by WVU and will be taught again. So what I want to say is that Beckley is actually something of a collective, although the major tenant quite clearly will be WVU Tech, and the sort of flagship down there will be WVU Tech. So I think the easiest way to think of it is as the Beckley campus, and it's the home of WVU Tech. And I suspect most people will call it WVU Tech, just as they did in Montgomery. It isn't easy. Any questions from Potomac State? Tech doesn't get to ask any.
We have no questions. Thank you, Nigel.
Sure thing. Thank you, everyone.
So I just want to remind everybody that Year 3 PEIA Healthy Tomorrows forms are due by May 15th, 2017. So if you're a policy holder for PEIA, you are required to participate to avoid the $500 deductible penalty. I did check. There is not going to be a student health appointments like there were last year for year 2, so you will have to make an appointment with a PCP to get that screening and that form completed. The Faculty Senate volunteer survey is going to be going out this week. It's going to be asking questions. It'll go out to all faculty. It will be asking about volunteer service on committees and certain officer positions. So please make sure that you look out for that and encourage faculty in your units to volunteer for committees. I don't think that faculty often realize that you don't have to be a faculty senator to serve on faculty senate committees sometimes. So please make sure you're reminding folks. Our current faculty secretary, Alan Stoltenberg, has informed the executive committee that he won't be available to serve as faculty secretary after this semester. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to Alan. He's been the faculty secretary since 2013. One of his biggest roles is providing a point of continuity because chairs change every year, and he's a big part of what keeps us able to do what we do. So if you'll help me thank Alan. There will be more information forthcoming about finding a new secretary. There will be a question on that form if you're interested. Keep in mind that any member of the Faculty Assembly is eligible. Really, to be successful, you have to have a working knowledge of Faculty Senate in order to be able to answer most of the questions that come your way. Does anybody have any questions for me? All right, next we have the Curriculum Committee report with Karen Haynes.
Thank you. We have 7 annexes and a new major. I'll go through and sort of chunk them together for time's sake today. So we have Annex 1, which is the new courses report, Annex 2, the course changes report, Annex 3, the capstone courses report, Annex 4, the harmonization report, which includes new courses. All of those annexes are as they are in your agenda. In Annex 5, we need to make a couple of changes. There were 8 computer engineering courses that we need to make minor changes with, and so I'm going to pull those from this report, and they will appear in next month's report, and that is Computer Engineering 347, 351, 361, 411, 425, 431, 461, and 462. Then we have Annex 6, which is the harmonization report that includes the course deactivations, and Annex 7 is the harmonization report, which shows the courses that were harmonized or aligned.
Stop there. We'll do the new major separately. So questions about any of those?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So Karen, the courses that we're pulling from Annex 5, they're CE, but CE stands for Civil Engineering. So there are 8 civil engineering courses, just to be clear. Because there are computer engineering on there too. Yeah.
Whoops.
Okay. So it's all of the civil engineering courses are going to be removed from the report.
Yes.
Are there any other questions or points of discussion about any of the annexes that Karen went through? So that's 1 through 7. Okay. So we'll vote on 1 through 4 and 6, and then we'll vote on 5 since it had to change separately. So all those in favor of approving annexes 1 through 4 and 6, please say aye. Any opposed, no. Potomac State, how do you vote?
Potomac State has 3 ayes.
Thank you. WVU Tech, how do you vote?
WVU Tech has 3 ayes.
Thank you. The ayes have it. Annexes 1 through 4 and 6 are approved. All right. All those in favor of approving Annex 5 as amended, please say aye. Any opposed, no. Potomac State, how do you vote?
Potomac State has 3 ayes.
Thank you. WVU Tech Montgomery, how do you vote?
WVU Tech has 3 ayes.
Okay, the ayes have it. Annex 5 is approved as amended. Annex 7 was for information. Since I didn't hear any questions, we will file Annex 7. You ready for the?
And last, we have for your approval the new major in interdisciplinary studies.
Are there any objections or points of discussion for the new major in interdisciplinary studies? All those in favor of approving the new major, please say aye. Any opposed, no. Potomac State, how do you vote?
Potomac State has 3 ayes.
WVU Tech, how do you vote?
WVU Tech has 3 ayes.
The ayes have it. The new major in interdisciplinary studies is approved. Thank you. Up next, we have the General Education Foundations Committee report with Lisa DiBartolomeo.
And thank you, Nigel Clark, for the little plug for the Jeff. Just a couple of updates. Lou sent out an email that hopefully all faculty got, and actually I'm pretty sure you got it because I've gotten a lot of emails about it today. In the first link in the email, apparently there's a mistake. There's something underlined that shouldn't be. But the fourth email is more or less identical to the first email, and you can just click on the fourth link, rather. The fourth link you can click on instead of the first link. They're the same thing, but the fourth one works. And for those of you who are unsure of what this means, what this process is about, it's basically a way of getting everyone through the KIM process, getting all of the courses that were transitioned over from GEC to GEF through the curriculum inventory management online process, and then giving us a chance on the JEFCO, as well as the folks in TLC and Lou's shop, to review them and not have them all bottleneck at the same time. So what we're going to be doing is, if you get the email for your course in a particular area at a particular time, you're welcome to do it then. If you want to wait, you can wait until it's more convenient for you. But that way you'll be able to go through a targeted workshop that will presumably be looking at your particular learning goals and help you not only navigate the online process, but also figure out which LEAP goals you want to target and how you want to assess them. You're free to go to any of the workshops, but you don't have to go to the workshops. They're just extra in case you feel like you need a little bit more guidance and a little bit more help, and you can also use it as an opportunity to work on assessments for your course. The only thing mandatory is that you need to have everything through KIM by December 31st, 2017. Did you do that on my birthday on purpose because you hate me, Lou? So if your courses aren't through or in the system by then, you will be dropped from the JEF, okay? And this process replaces, remember the 5-year audits that we used to do for GEC, this more or less replaces that, and it should be painless, should be easy, and once it's in KIM, it will be easy to update and change and work on. So I'm happy to take any questions about that from people who haven't already emailed me. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Up next, we have an update on the potential impact of the recent executive orders on immigration.
My job today is quite easy. I'm here to introduce our fabulous head of our International Student Scholar Services, who will take us through the report. Duina Jikic. So.
Thank you, William. For the past 2 weeks, we've been extremely busy all of us in the Office of Global Affairs have been busy addressing hundreds of questions, hundreds of emails, and questions in person from those affected by President Trump's executive orders. On January 27th, when the travel ban affecting nationals of 7 Muslim-majority countries was passed, there were 2 things that came to my mind. The first one, my own experience as an immigrant, and secondly, how can we help everyone dealing with such matters? On my own immigration story, this is something that one day I will write a book, so when that happens, I'm going to let you know. But in terms of how we've been assisting our scholars and students affected by President Trump's executive orders, in order for you to understand the specific areas in which we put the most effort in, I would like to briefly go over the key provisions of the executive orders, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And also, when I do that, I would like to just specifically tell you how that specific provision from that executive order affects our international students and scholars. So these are the 3 executive orders: border security and immigration enforcement improvements passed on January 25th, 2017, enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States on January 25th, 2017, and protecting the nation, the travel ban, which has been receiving most coverage in the news. That was passed on January 27, 2017. The border security and immigration enforcement. This specific section, Section 10, it's extremely scary because it puts the authority for immigration enforcement in the hands of local and state enforcement agencies. And why am I saying that this is scary for me and also for many experts in our field? Even if you have worked in this field of expertise for many years, it is difficult to determine when someone is in the country legal or illegal. So to have this authority to make a determination on this kind of matters, even for a police officer who has the best intentions and does the best job that he could do, it's very, very easy to make mistakes. The area of immigration law is extremely complex, and someone needs many years of practice and expertise. Another executive order which I feel that it's very, very important to talk about is enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States. All of us know that the executive order that has received most coverage is the travel ban. However, this one, which is very much alive and in effect at this point in time, it went into effect immediately on January 25th. It's the one that has scary provisions for foreign nationals, even for those who have been legally in the United States and not even nationals of the 7 countries. It went into effect immediately again. Under this section, the enforcement priorities have been expanded much more broadly than during Obama's administration. During President Obama's administrations, there were a lot of deportations and removals, much more than in the past. But with this executive order, this enforcement has become extremely broad. So what the areas within this executive order in this specific Section 5 that have been expanded are the priorities for removal and detention. They've been expanded to include basically any criminal offense. It used to be more serious crimes. However, now It's much broader. It can include a misdemeanor, a DUI, or just simply shoplifting a piece of gum. The priorities also extend to charges with any criminal offense where charges has not been resolved, and I know that's very troubling especially for attorneys to possibly even understand that anything like this can make you become subject to, you basically become a priority if you are in this category. Also, acts committed that constitute criminal offense where you have not even been charged, and also other areas that these enforcement priorities have been extended to include committed fraud or willful misrepresentation in connection with any matters. And, of course, another one that people have been extremely worried about and have contacted our office about are abuse of federal programs designed for medical benefits. So that's one area that a lot of people have been asking us questions. Now, one other area that is actually very close to our practice, what we do every day in our international office, it's the sponsoring of foreign nationals, professors, and researchers for permanent residency. So just to give you an example, I'll probably say precise example of what that means for a petition that the university files on behalf of an assistant professor, for instance, for the professor to become permanent residents of the United States. There is one step which happens to be the very last step of the permanent residency process that deals with adjustment to permanent residency from whatever the type of visa the individual is on to become a permanent resident. There are a lot of questions, 2 or 3 pages of questions that ask whether the individual has ever committed any violations, any crimes, arrests. It used to be that, and we've seen over the years, situations, DUIs, for instance, where the person may have or may not have spent, any time in being arrested or in prison. And every time we saw a case in this category, we asked the professor to simply get papers from the court, and we would attach them to the petition, and the green card would still go through. That's no longer the case, and this is something that we've been talking to anyone who has asked us questions in this category. And the 2 forums that we had, there were a lot of questions in this area. And of course, the one that has received most coverage in the news is the one that has to do with the travel ban, the 90-day suspension of visa issuance, admission to the United States, and adjudication of other benefits for nationals of 7 majority Muslim countries: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. And another piece of this, so again, I've extracted the specific provisions that would impact our students and scholars, implementation of a biometric entry-exit. I think that has been in there after 9/11, but it's going to be expanded. And also immediate suspension of the visa interview waiver program. What does that mean? Some of you may know that when foreign nationals go to a U.S. embassy abroad and applies for a visa, it used to be that you would not need to appear in person at the U.S. embassy in front of the U.S. State Department officer. You would just send your passport and receive it back with the stamp. Stamped in your passport. That's no longer the case. Every single person that will be applying for a visa at a U.S. embassy or consulate abroad is going to have to appear in person. So that has been done away with. And what does that mean for our hiring departments. When you plan on bringing foreign nationals, visitors, plan ahead, because it's going to take much more time. And it's very, very important to understand that this is an important piece that has changed. Also, it is my understanding from reading this executive order that a review of all visa reciprocity agreements and possibly adjustment of the terms, validity periods, and fees will be changed. This is a quick update on the travel ban, and all of you have been following the news. So this is the court. The court cases that have been, handled, and the, actual, the dates according to which all these decisions have been made. But to make the long story short, the travel is currently on a temporary status. So it has been lifted on a temporary basis. So what that means, no one exactly what it means is very clear. It's not being enforced at this point in time, and people have no trouble, traveling. However, it is temporary only, and no one knows which direction this travel ban is going to go to. We don't know whether it's going to go to Supreme Court. We've heard rumors about President Trump having the intention to pass another executive order and maybe leave this alone. We don't know. It is as simple as that. So currently, the travel ban was lifted. It is temporary. So the good news is that U.S. State Department, also the Customs and Borders Control, and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is doing business as usual under current procedures and guidelines. So what that means for us in our international office and for the hiring departments is that applications that we file on behalf of foreign nationals from the 7 countries are being attended to under current rules and regulations. Also, people who had their visas revoked, and that happened to probably thousands of people, these revocations have been reinstated. So that's a good news. Whether the revocation took place electronically or took place physically, everything in terms of the visa stamps that have been revoked have been reinstated. So this is what our office is currently advising our international students and scholars. If you are currently in the United States, we recommend that you do not travel outside the United States. Yes, the ban is temporarily lifted, but we never know. It's just a temporary window, basically. So you never know if you get out of the country. If you return, you may get stuck. Those who are outside the United States, if you know of anyone in this category, please advise them to contact our office. And also, if they have an immigration attorney, to talk to their attorneys. We do have 129 students and 12 faculty members from the 7 countries, which were named in the order. Also, very, very important for our students and scholars to know is what are their rights. We received hundreds of questions on this. What's going to happen to me if I'm stopped on the street? If someone knocks my door and wants to get into the house? If I'm at the university in the classroom and an officer comes in and wants to pick me up. And what we've done, we've been advising them to consult this excellent resource from the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. And basically, we've been putting them at peace by saying that they have the same constitutional protection as American citizens, with some exceptions such as voting. So a lot of people have been feeling much, much better. In conclusion, we advise the foreign nationals from the 7 countries not to travel outside the United States. Dual citizens should use a passport from a non-banned country. And also the advice of planning ahead for bringing international students and scholars due to the visa waiver interview no longer being in existence. It's very important to remember that. And what you see on the screen is the main contact for questions, concerns. We've been receiving many questions from our hiring department. So very important to know that it's not only the international students and scholars that we've been talking to, but also the hiring departments who have been calling with concerns about some of the staff or the professors that they hire. That's all I wanted to share with you today.
Any questions? Questions?
Hi, Dave Hauser from Eberly. I saw in the second executive order they expanded the possibility for deportation to willful misrepresentation on official forms. Would that include such things as messing up, WVU documents and things like that? We are an official government agency, sort of, kinda. So in other words, are potentially students or faculty liable if they mess up things around here?
Definitely, if that happened, that would be, very bad news. But in terms of the actual implementation and how exactly this would be implemented, that's still to be seen. And currently, the American Lawyers Association is working on some guidance specifically on this area that you asked your question on.
Heather Billings, School of Medicine. I actually have a peripheral question related to international travel of any of us. We're hearing in the news recently about several U.S. citizens being stopped at the border and demanded to unlock their cell phones, give out passwords, even on the Global Entry program. And I'm wondering what we would be advised to do if we're traveling internationally, in addition to the expert control process that we're already supposed to go through, because that directly contradicts our terms of usage and employment requirements not to give up those passwords.
Thanks for this question. I'm glad you asked this question. Having a cell phone, getting your cell phone out on the airport, it's not a good idea, especially in the customs area. We had a student before, actually right after the spring semester, the student was getting ready to come back, and he arrived at the port of entry, and he was questioned about his enrollment. And poor student gets his phone out to look up his enrollment information. The officer reached out to him and simply asked the student for the cell phone, and unfortunately, there's some information there that the officer used against the student, and the student was put back on the plane and returned to his country. And we have connected the student with an immigration authority to see whether there's any type of help. So very, very important, please spread the word about not using your cell phone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The other campuses, any questions? Potomac or WVU Tech?
WVU Tech, hi, just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we are very happy to address some questions right after the travel ban was passed. There's the department was worried about a professor who was on travel. Luckily, that professor returned, and everything was fine. But we were on top of advising that department on what the professor should do or not do.
Great. Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Next, we have an update on R1 status and research from Fred King.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for letting me come here today to speak with you. I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about R1 status, what that means to WVU. And then, of course, the other question is how do we stay R1 as we go forward? So, first of all, in talking with different people, it's become clear to me that we talk about Carnegie classification, R1 status, but sometimes we don't really fully understand what that means. And so the category we're in is doctoral universities. That means that we produce 20 or more doctorate degrees that are either research or scholarship oriented. Then right below that would be the master's colleges and universities. That would be, for example, Marshall would fall into that category. And then you have baccalaureate colleges, which is many of our 4 years across the state. You go down, you have a couple of others. There are a total of 7 different categories. But in West Virginia, we're the only one in that doctoral category. So I thought I would make that point. And then when we think about within that particular category, we talk about being R1, which really means we're the highest research activity as determined by the Carnegie Group. So that would include our institutions nearby, such as Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. If you go to R2, those are higher research activity universities, but not quite as active as we are. And those would include universities like Duquesne, Ohio University, and the College of William and Mary. And then finally, there are the doctoral universities that are moderate research activity. They're producing the number of doctorates we mentioned, but perhaps their research activity isn't nearly as strong as the others. And those would be institutions such as Clarkson, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and Robert Morris University. So it gives you kind of a sense of, who the universities are that are most like us, and then who some of the other universities are out there. And it's important to realize that really this Carnegie classification really goes to research activity more than anything else. So if we go to the website where the classifications are listed, you can go through the process of institution lookup. And when you look up West Virginia University, this is the information that will come up. And of course, we're focused really on that basic classification of R1 or highest research activity for a doctoral university. Interestingly, at that website, each of these categories has a checkbox by it. You can check those checkboxes and see which other universities are similar to you. So if I click all the boxes for WVU, we're the only university that comes back. Okay, so in many ways, we're pretty unique within the Carnegie system or the classification. I can go through and uncheck various boxes. The one box that I can uncheck where there actually appear other universities is the one under undergraduate profile, where it's 4-year full-time selective lower transfer. If I deselect that box, leave all the others selected, then about 10 to 12 other universities show up. Okay? So the thing that kind of differentiates us from many R1s then is our undergraduate profile. And that's either in terms of some of those institutions are more selective, some have a higher transfer in rate, and some may be even part-time. So I just thought I would let you know about that. So knowing that, I think it's important also to consider the fact that I'm asked often, is our goal to be R1? That's really not a goal. In my mind, Carnegie classification of research highest activity is an outcome. It's an outcome of the things that we've done over several years at the university. Most importantly, it's an outcome of faculty productivity. And so it's really not a goal for us. Later I'll talk about goals, but it truly is an outcome of what we've accomplished. And so when you look at an analysis that Sean Storrs did for us, he compared, what the data looked like in 2010 when we were essentially R2 with what the data looked like in 2015 when we moved up to that highest research activity classification of R1. And it turns out that the data that the classification is based on is usually data 1 to 2 years prior to the year of classification. And so in terms of things like expenditures, those are NSF data for fiscal year 2014. The HR data in terms of faculty numbers or student degree conferrals, those come out of the IPEDS data for the 2013-2014 year. And so if you were to look at what changed from those times, you would see that we had a change in terms of the number of faculty. We actually increased by almost 100 faculty during that time. We had an increase in the number of degrees granted in the STEM disciplines. We had a slight increase in the science and engineering R&D expenditures. And then we also increased the number of non-faculty research staff and postdocs. And then what Carnegie does is they have these various research correlates. And some of them are absolute numbers, like the ones I've just gone through. Others are per capita, where they take selected absolute numbers and divide them by the number of faculty. So the per capita S&E R&D went up during that time, and that was another one of the things that changed for us. Sean Stewart went through an analysis to say, okay, how close were we to the R1 threshold, or the line for being an R1 university? And so you see WVU's numbers for the 7 different correlates across the top, and then you see the R1 minimum threshold. In a couple of the areas, it turns out that we were the minimum number. So the number there that's presented is the next university up from us. So in terms of doctorates granted in the social sciences, we were actually the lowest number of any R1 university. In terms of non-science and engineering R&D expenditures, we were the lowest university out of the 115 that are R1 universities. And remember, our rank within that group is 109. And so what Carnegie does is they pick these 7 different correlates based upon the things that they believe determine sort of your impact in research, or what they believe are metrics of research output for a university. If we go through now, we look at how we compare to the median of these different classes. So the blue chart, the blue area on the chart here is really for the doctoral university's highest research activity, R1s. The gold is WVU's number. The red, or kind of purple on my screen, is higher research, or R2s. And then the green would be the R3 universities. So you see kind of in the median S&E R&D expenditures, you know, we're pretty clearly above the R2 median, but you know, we're still fairly below the R1 median. And then you look down at the number of S&E research staff, and you see that, you know, we're pretty much in the middle there, moving up. The one that concerns me a bit, again, is the non-S&E R&D number. You'll see that, you know, we're a little bit closer to the R2s than to the R1s in that one. And then if we look at the doctoral degree production, the number of doctorates in various fields, again, there what you see is that, you know, in the humanities area, we're a little bit lower than we probably should be as an R1. So that's an area of concern. The social science doctorates were even closer to the R2 group. The STEM doctorates were kind of in between. And then median number of doctorates in other professional fields. Okay, these are degrees that are not classified as humanities, social science, or STEM degrees. But all the doctorates they're talking about here are also research and scholarly doctorates. So none of the true professional doctorates like JD, MD, DDS, PharmD, they're not entered into the count. And so in that sort of other doctorates areas, I believe that might include EDD, but we're trying to figure that out. Then when we get to the per capita numbers, again, we see that we're kind of closer to the R2 universities when we look at the science and engineering R&D expenditures per capita. If we look at the number of science and engineering research staff, we're again pretty close to the R2. When we look at the per capita number for the non-science and engineering R&D expenditures, we actually fall below the R2 median value. So that's, again, something to think about. As we think about, you know, going forward strategies for things we want to do, we probably want to think about how we grow the number of doctoral degrees in those areas, and also grow the research expenditures in those non-S&E areas. So if I look at sort of the bottom 25 of R1 universities, we're in there at 109, and the universities in the gold are the ones that sort of made the transition from R2 to R1 this last time. At the very bottom, you have the University of Mississippi. It's interesting because prior to this, Mississippi State University was R1, and University of Mississippi was R2. In this last analysis, they flipped places. The other thing that I think is interesting is when you look at number 90, you find California Institute of Technology. You look further down at 95, you find Carnegie Mellon University. And so part of that is being R1 doesn't reflect excellence in one particular area, but it's looking at overall excellence. And so for institutions like Carnegie Mellon or Caltech, where they have a heavy emphasis in a couple of different areas, you see it's a little bit more challenging for them to stay R1. This last round, Dartmouth fell from R1 to R2, as another example. But I think it's useful for us to sort of know who's around us, what we look like, and who else looks like us. So when Carnegie does their classification, basically they're looking at a two-dimensional graph. And along the x-axis are sort of the aggregate activity numbers. These are those absolute number values, and they come up with a score for those. The y-axis is a score for the per capita values. So each university is plotted on the graph, and so the orange dots are the R3 universities, the kind of green or teal dots are the R2s, and the blues are the R1s. And so where we line up on the chart is, not too far away from the line. And that was why Sean called his analysis approaching the line for R1. And so, that gives our values for X and Y and our coordinates. It turns out if I had a pointer, I could show you, if you look at two dots that are very, very close to the line, one is green, one is blue, kind of midway up, that's Mississippi and Mississippi State. So you kind of see where they are on the chart. As I looked at the analysis, I looked for universities that had similar numbers of faculty to us, similar student enrollments, and similar missions somewhat. And as I go up the chart, the next two universities I find that fall into that are Virginia Commonwealth University at 85 and University of Missouri Columbia at 73. And so you see they're much further into the blue zone. So I think about those universities as kind of pace cars for us as we think about what we need to do going forward and what they may look like and what we need to look like if we want to retain our R1 status. So I said that this is based on a lot of NSF data. Every year, the NSF Higher Education Research and Development Survey is completed by the folks at the university. It's turned into NSF. Those numbers are available at their website. And so if you look at the rankings, they'll rank universities by their total R&D expenditures. So West Virginia University, we did about $170 million in total R&D expenditures. Now that is federal, state, university, things like cost share, startup, and also private money, either from foundations or corporations. We rank 116. You also notice that just having a high number there doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be R1, because you see Mississippi State University at a much higher number, ranked 94, is an R2 university. But in general, you can kind of follow how this goes. You see Missouri Columbia, one of my pace cars, it's ranked 85 at $231 million in total R&D expenditures. And then if we go to looking at just the federal R&D expenditures, we tend to do a little bit less there than we did in terms of the overall expenditures. We rank at 130. You still see R2 universities that rank ahead of us, New Mexico State University at 120, Mississippi State at 118. You see that there's not much difference between us and Kansas State, right? $1 million makes a difference of going from 130 to 126 in these rankings. Now, the small print information I find very interesting. When you do the analysis, you find that the top 20 research universities in the US account for about $13 billion or 34% of all federal R&D expenditures. So you really see the wealth is concentrated to a large extent. At number one, there's Johns Hopkins. 5.3% of all federal R&D funding goes to Hopkins. It was interesting because I was at a conference and the VP for research at Hopkins was there talking about, well, they do the best they can with the meager federal funding that they get there. I find that quite ironic. Our friends up the north at Pitt, they're number 9 in the ranking, and they do about 1.5% of all the federal R&D in higher education. We account for about 0.2%. So one way I think of this is that you took, say, 5 to 6 of the universities around us, that basically adds up to what Pitt gets as one institution. So you would take us, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, all together, we're about what Pitt does. So again, you see, the wealth is concentrated in many of the universities. All right, but it always helps to know where you stand, who's near you, and then identify who are your pace cars, who you're going to try to keep up with or catch up with. Looking historically in terms of how R&D trends have gone over time, it's very interesting because the general trend you see there is, sort of a flat time, and then you see growth from about 2009 to about 2012 and kind of decline there. It's interesting as we look at that chart, 2010 is kind of an important year for several reasons, okay? First of all, 2010 is when the ARA funding really started being expended. Okay, so that plays a role in what happens there. Other things, though, that are happening there is that's when the earmark moratorium began. All right? So that's the time at which the earmarks that were supporting universities started to dry up. They had a few years that they would burn, but then they would be gone. And then significantly for us, that is when we lost Senator Byrd, who we know had a tremendous impact on our funding in research. If we look at the trends for various universities there, you see that Clemson is kind of flat. You see that Kansas State University grew somewhat. You see that Oklahoma State University, which starts in 2010, a couple of universities start in 2010, but that's because that's also when NSF changed some of the reporting for universities that had separate campuses. But you see that Oklahoma State kind of grew and then really fell off significantly, going from 2012 to 2013. WVU is in that blue line. We end up in 2015 ahead of where we were in 2006. We hit a high point around 2011, okay? And we had some ARA funding that came in that year that kind of helped us. So at least we're not doing the thing that Oklahoma State did, which was kind of like cratering. We're maintaining relatively flat, a little bit of growth. You look at, I believe it's New Mexico State University, which is green, and you see it just declines. It keeps on going down. All right. Likewise, you see the same thing occurring for Mississippi State University. And so, of course, Mississippi State University is a function of various factors, probably earmarks among those. And then I look at our PACE car, Virginia Commonwealth University. It's a little bit different because what it does from 2012 is it declines a little bit, but then it starts picking back up, okay? So part of this is they got one of the large NIH CTSA awards, which helped them grow. So what I would hope we would do is think about things that we could do to have that sort of trajectory. You see that Kentucky, they kind of declined overall from 2006 to 2015. But if you were to look at the federal discretionary dollars during that same time, you would see a decline not unlike what Kentucky saw. So Kentucky was really mirroring the national trend. There was a decline in the dollars. If you look here locally and I think about different agencies that we rely on for our funding and we look at change over time, people who've looked at these numbers for a while know that we do this zigzag pattern, okay? We go through peaks and troughs at WVU with our funding over time. And so part of that is, we have a finite number of people engaged in the funding game. They'll get saturated one year, then they'll get hungry the next year, and you see that up and down, up and down. What I look at is the overall trajectory. The overall trajectory there is positive, particularly in the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. DOE I find interesting because we had growth there in fiscal year 2015, but that's also the year that we lost the NETL contract. So even with that loss, we continued to grow. There were a couple of things that helped there. There was the MSEAL project, the Marcellus Shale Environmental Engineering Laboratory, and some other competitive DOE awards that we got. What I find heartening is the fact that when I look from 2006 to 2016, we're growing, and we're growing really in competitive work, not so much earmarks anymore. And then you see, other areas. One of the areas I think we need to work on is DOD. We've historically had stronger funding in DOD than we have at the moment. And so, part of the reason behind thinking about starting what's called the University Innovation Corporation was to prepare us to capture a larger fraction of the DOD funding. So if I look at our overall portfolio, it's pretty balanced among the various agencies, which is pretty important right now because we don't know which agencies are going to be invested in by the feds and which agencies are going to be declining. Certainly if the Heritage Foundation and the Republic Senate group has their way, we would see declines in things like, the fossil energy budget. We would see declines in EPA. We would see declines in science and behavioral and economics in the National Science Foundation. So our portfolio is very balanced. It's fairly heavy in health and human services, but that's not unusual when you have a medical school associated with you, because a large fraction of that is National Institutes of Health. If I look at where those dollars are expended by different areas, the largest area for us is life sciences. And that's not just the medical school, but that includes aspects of biology, the folks in the Davis College, ag sciences, things like that. West Virginia University, we have a strong environmental sciences group too, and that shows up here in terms of the funding. Engineering, no surprise, it's a big contributor. And when I think about institutions and what these pie charts look like for them, they really reflect in ways the history of the institution, its origins, what it's doing. When you think about us, we started as a land grant early on. So that means that we were heavy in agriculture, heavy in engineering. You see the environmental sciences, you see the life sciences. And then as we add the medical school, the life sciences continues to grow. If I look at our friends at Missouri Columbia, they have a slightly different profile. They're heavily life sciences. And a lot of that is because agriculture is very important in Missouri. So they have a large chunk of USDA funding that helps them along the way. Their engineering is strong too because they're another land grant like us. You see their math and computer sciences is a little bit stronger than what ours is. You see their environmental sciences is not so strong. But they're a land grant, and then they had different areas of emphasis as they grew over the years. If I look at Virginia Commonwealth, which is not a land grant, but similar to us in many ways, again, life sciences is huge. And that goes back to the fact that, Virginia Commonwealth was formed in the 70s by merging a medical school with what had been really an arts institution. And I raised the last point because you see the non-S&E fraction of the expenditures at VCU is very large. And that reflects a large amount of investment in the arts there. It turns out that their arts programs rank number 1 or 2 in the nation. And you kind of see that reflected, okay? But it goes back to their history. They were founded by combining, a medical school and what was primarily an arts institute at the time. So if we consider that our status is an outcome, not a goal, it's an outcome of many things. It's an outcome of our history. I forgot to mention something that Jay Cole told me that I had never known. WVU was late into the federally funded research game. And the reason for that was that the state actually had a law that did not allow us to take federal grant dollars unless we had an equivalent amount of money in the bank at the time. So while other research universities were really growing, we were kind of stymied, and this persisted up through the 60s. So if it's an outcome and it's not a goal, what should goals be? And I think the goals are the ones that we would all agree to. First of all, we need to inspire our students, right? Because if we're doing that, we're doing the right things. We need to strive to transform our fields of inquiry, okay? No matter what those are, each of us needs to think about how we're making a difference in our discipline. We want to pursue our passions as scholars. It's like I've told students, right? If you don't love what you're doing, you're not going to do a good job at it. But if you love it, you're going to do a great job at it. And I think we need to continue to do that. And then probably more importantly than ever, we have to demonstrate our relevance to society. It's a time where society is really questioning the value of higher education. And I think, if we're not making the case, that's going to be reflected in things like the funding that we receive from the federal government. That being said, there are a couple of other things that we should think about. Okay, I've talked a little bit about peers, pace cars. We need to be sure that we're exceeding the performance of our peers. We have a group that we're kind of in the middle of the pack of. We want to be at the head of that pack. Okay, we want to exceed what they're doing in terms of their performance. Beyond that, we need to be striving to achieve peer performance, aspirational peer performance. We need to be looking to who are those universities we want to be like. And then that actually goes beyond the university because the university can't do this. What makes the difference is what the faculty achieve individually, okay, within their peer group and their aspirational peer groups. So I think it's important that people identify, okay, who is out there that I most like and I'm competing against, and who do I want to compete against tomorrow, and what do I need to do to advance in that regard? And so I'll leave us with the following. This is a comparison of how we stand compared to Virginia Commonwealth and Missouri Columbia, okay? These are two of my aspirational peers where I would like to see us solidly into the R1 chart, all right? And so when we look at things there, the UG to FTE, that's the number of undergraduate to the total instructional faculty at the university. It does not include medical faculty. And you see in that ratio, we're kind of high compared to VCU and Missouri Columbia. If I look at the tenure track to total instructional faculty ratio, we're very high compared to the other institutions. And then what that means is when we get to undergraduate versus tenure track, actually we're lighter than those institutions, which means we should have more capacity for research, all right? Because the instructional faculty are taking a heavier load. If I look at the degrees produced, we're very similar in terms of numbers of bachelor's degrees. Columbia is slightly larger than us. Master's degrees, we're all very similar. I get to the doctorate degrees, and there's a stark difference there, right? We're about half as productive as we really should be for the size of institution we are in doctorate degrees. And that's important when we think about the impact on R1 status. If I look at the per capita expenditures, in S&E, we're pretty close to VCU, but we're pretty far from Missouri Columbia. On the other hand, in terms of the non-S&E, we're doing much better at the Missouri Columbia. We're not up to VCU, but remember VCU has the advantage of being the very strong arts school and having a lot of investment in that area. So I thought I would sort of leave us with this in terms of thinking about institutionally what we want to strive for. And then I think, though, it's up to us individually to think about what we're trying to do in our particular areas. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for the talk. I'm Matt Valenti from Statler. When computing the per capita numbers, who counts and what implications?
All of the faculty.
And what implications might that have in terms of hiring and retention strategies?
Okay, so that per capita number, the number of faculty Carnegie uses out of IPEDS is all of the instructional faculty. And that also includes the medical faculty. It includes the TAPs as well as the tenure and tenure track faculty. And so, we saw that we grew by about 100 from 2010 to 2015. So when you grow the number of faculty, you need to be more productive to stay within the R1 category. All right. Any questions from the folks at Potomac State?
We have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. And from West Virginia Tech / WVU Beckley?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for their time.
Okay, next we have the ACF report with Roy Nutter.
I think I'm going to shorten this a bit. The February the 3rd was a Higher Education Policy Commission meeting, which I attended in Charleston, and the ACF meeting. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of things going on, but really the bottom line is budget. You really think about it, it's budget. And I probably liken it to we're locked in the room with a bear, and it's not a black bear, and it's not a grizzly bear. It's one of those Alaskan brown bears. John said in his introduction at the beginning that $4 billion state budget, but really only $1.7 billion is that we can affect. That's a $2 billion effect. Our deficit's $500 million this coming year. That's 25% of the budget that can be affected. Think about that. The governor's State of the State, I assume most people listened to that or watched it. He also had an alternative budget, which I found rather interesting. He mentioned it in his speech. He said that to get $450 million in cuts, if you just make it up in cuts, WVU and Marshall will go to 45.6% of their current state budget, and all other state schools are eliminated, all. And you still don't make $450 million. So it's a hole, and it's a big hole. The only other thing I came out with that I thought you might find interesting is Fairmont State had a meeting with Governor Justice before he became governor. And one of the things that I guess they presented was, this is Fairmont. I don't think Fairmont is necessarily unlike any of the other state schools, probably with the exception of Marshall and WVU. But according to what they said was that all extras have already been cut. They noted that they have cut all services to the community, which I'm sure would not go over well here. They've cut all extracurricular trips, and all that's left in their budget is courses. And if you cut that, then they are into layoffs. And I think that's probably pretty much the state higher education status. It's not a good thing.
Does anybody have any questions for Roy? Okay, up next we have the Board of Governors report with Stan Hallman.
All right, the Board of Governors met 3 times since the last time. We had 2 special meetings on the 18th and 27th of January, and a regular meeting this past week on the 9th and 10th. The meeting on the 27th was basically to talk about and ratify the decision that Arnold Hall be closed and those students shifted to University Place. It was apparent for some time that University Place was having financial difficulties, and Arnold Hall also has several issues, including some deferred maintenance and costs of greater than $20 million. So it was felt that this was a decision or a solution that really helped to solve 2 problems at one time. On February 10th, we were also told that the finances at WVU were audited, and WVU was given an unqualified or clean opinion to mean that the accounting practices here were accurate and done very well. As John also mentioned, we were able to celebrate or help in the celebration of the $10 million gift from the Reynolds family, which will help build a new B&E building where Stansbury Hall now stands. That's a little bittersweet. I played a lot of basketball when I should have been studying during my undergrad time here at WVU, but all things, I guess, get updated at some point. And I'll end with just saying that our next regularly scheduled meeting is in April on the 20th and 21st, and we'll be giving our faculty presentation on that date.
Are there any questions for the Board of Governors report? Okay, thank you. We do have at least one item of new business. I believe that Travis Steimling is going to discuss the resolution that was emailed out to everybody on Friday from the Research and Service Committee.
Indeed. Travis Steimling, College of Creative Arts. You have, on Friday, you received a resolution that has been approved by the members of the Committee on Research and Scholarship, dealing with the current executive order, a series of orders, in fact. We were very concerned that The order, particularly the travel ban, would have a negative impact on our ability to conduct the research portion of our mission here at the university. And in collaboration with a number of our colleagues here in the Senate, we drafted this resolution and approved it via an email vote. And so we bring it to you for your consideration.
Since it was distributed, unless somebody really wants us to read all of it, we're not going to read it. Would you? Do you need a copy on the front row? So I think that it just went out to senators. Would you like to look at a copy? Joyce? Oh, sure. Okay. I thought you were looking for it. So since it's coming from the committee, it's my understanding we don't need a second on the motion. Is there any discussion on the resolution? All right. All those in favor of approving the resolution, please say aye. Any opposed, no? No. Potomac State, how do you vote?
Potomac State has 3 ayes.
WVU Tech Montgomery, how do you vote?
WVU Tech has 2 ayes and 1 no.
It sounds like the ayes have it. The resolution is approved. Is there any other new business?
Sorry, I know it's the longest meeting of the year, right? So, Eddie Fuller, College of Arts and Sciences, Mathematics. I was asked by one of my constituents to bring up a new House Bill 2335 that was introduced, I think, on the 10th of this month. It is co-sponsored by Delegate Fritsch and is titled Protecting Academic Freedom in Higher Education, modifying existing statutes, quote unquote, to protect academic freedom in higher education, prohibiting employment decisions concerning faculty members from being based solely on political or religious beliefs, requiring all tenure, search, and hiring committee deliberations to be recorded and made available to appropriate constituted authorities, prohibiting students from being graded on political or religious beliefs, requiring academic disciplines to welcome a diversity of approaches to unsettled questions, and to provide dissenting viewpoints. I'll save you the rest of it, but there are in particular 3 sections of this that relate to grading of students, to the way that curricula are decided upon. Curricula and reading lists in the humanities and social sciences must respect the uncertainty and unsettled character of all human knowledge. I would encourage you to take a look at this and read it in its entirety. You know, this is one of these pieces of legislation that says it's protecting academic freedom, but it's also potentially a lever to allow people to exploit that as a way to conform the way that we teach our classes to a certain ideology, where that should really be up to the professor who's teaching it. And moreover, I'm really more concerned that I don't even know how you would record all tenure, search, and hiring committee deliberations other than to videotape them or record them. And then we're supposed to be the names of the committee members may be redacted from the record, but still there's a recording. So I don't know if this is something that we need to take up as a resolution or to debate openly, but I was asked to bring it to the floor. So,
Which number is that again?
House Bill, it's House Bill 2335, 2017. It was just introduced last week.
Thank you.
Co-sponsored by Cindy Fritsch and the rest of the Republican constituency.
So, I mean, I'm assuming you're just informing us.
I'm informing, and I'm not making a motion at this point, but I would reserve the opportunity to maybe construct a resolution if that's something of interest and that we wanted to do that.
Does Roy Nutter?
Just a reminder of process that usually what happens, these bills are introduced. Currently, there's over 335, obviously, in the House. Senate's just approaching 300. A lot of these things will never see the light of day. So we need to keep track of it, stay on top of it, know or even contact the person that originated the bill and find out whether it's even got legs to do anything. A lot of them end up assigned to a committee, and that's the end of them. So we need to watch and be careful, but stay on top is my recommendation.
Maybe the ask then is to, as with many of these other things we've discussed, contact your representatives over and over again. And regarding these other things in D.C., call your senators and representatives and tell them what you think.
Thank you. Is there any other new business? Can I have a motion to adjourn? All right, meeting adjourned.